Let's go ahead and get started. It's 11:33. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Dirk Draper. I'm the president and CEO at the Colorado Springs Chamber of Commerce and Economic Development Corp. And it's really a pleasure to have you join us and have a panelist speakers join us today for our Chamber Connect on June 11th. You can see the title in the slide there, Why Connectivity is Key to COVID-19 Resilience. Topic hasn't gone away, has it? And today we're adding one more dimension to that discussion that we've provided in some previous Chamber Connects. Just want to remind you that today we'll be here until 12:30. We're not doing a networking session following the delivery of the program as we have in some prior Chamber Connects. So we'll be on until 12:30. I would ask you to rename yourself in your window with your name and your company. We will be drawing a winner for a special prize later in the program. So renaming yourself helps us identify the winner. Also, I'd ask you to please mute your mic if that's not already done. That should have been done globally as folks signed in, but if you see your mic is live, go ahead and mute it. And I will let you know that we are recording this presentation again. It will be available to the public to view by next week. If you want to repeat, see any additional information, or share that with others in your circles, there'll be an opportunity to do that. You'll find that on our website. Got a couple of announcements from the Chamber and EDC from our world. First off, our Chamber Connect next week will be workforce hiring strategies for a virtual world. We have been involved in some hiring activities both inside and outside the Chamber and EDC, and it does add a new dimension to what I think personally and professionally is the hardest thing we do in business, of finding good talent. So next week it'll be a panel presentation with a group of HR specialists from local employers, providing recommendations, suggestions, best practices that have emerged during this time. Here's a quick update on some bills that are being considered in our state legislature right now. As you may know, our state legislature is currently holding, they're in the last days of a second abbreviated session that was made necessary because of the pandemic and the interruption when they shut down back in March as the pandemic was in full bloom. We focused on some concerns about specific bills in our newsletter yesterday. If you haven't seen that, I'd encourage you to go back and look. That came from me, Chamber and EDC CEO, identifying specific bills that we have concerns about. When the state legislature convened this second session, they were committed to addressing only the state budget, only emergency relief for COVID, and some specific things on education. And we've seen them get off track a little bit and begin to look at some things that implement new taxes, new regulations, which they had committed to not doing in order to ease the recovery of our state's businesses. We had a town hall yesterday with 26 business organizations, border to border of Colorado, speaking to, it was a press conference, a virtual press conference, identifying specific bills and concerns and asking our legislators to take a different tack than they have on some of those bills. If you want more information on specific bills, I'll post this in the chat line in just a minute. You can find more information, and I'll post it here as soon as I'm done with my remarks. And I will tell you, for those of you who are members of the Chamber and EDC, your membership dollars fuel the work that we do, advocating for businesses to make Colorado Springs, to make the state of Colorado have a great business climate for businesses to succeed. So let's talk about today's Chamber Connect. BBSI is the sponsor of today's program. BBSI is a local, high-touch, professional employer organization. You may have heard the acronym PEO, a professional employer organization advocating on behalf of business owners. Their Colorado Springs team of subject matter experts can help provide consulting services for you to more easily navigate and propel small and medium-sized businesses through challenges in workman's compensation, in risk management, human resources, payroll, talent acquisition, we're talking about today, or we'll talk about next week, excuse me, and business consulting to help ensure both compliance and risk mitigation and to help companies scale for growth. If you're interested in more information, I'm going to put this in the chat line. Let's see. If you're interested in more information about their services from today's sponsor, reach out to Kevin Davis at BBSI. You'll see his his email address there in the chat box, kevin.davis@mybbsi.com, for a zero pressure discussion on how BBSI can assist your company's needs. My final comment is this is an interactive session. We ask you to encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation as they pop up. There will be some Q&A at the end as well, but as those questions come to mind, please post them in the chat line, and you can do that either to everyone or to Emma Mitchell. My colleague Emma is facilitating this, and she will help facilitate those questions as they're received as they come in. And now on to our presentation. Today's topic, why connectivity is the key to COVID resilience. And I'll turn it over to Sarah Muley from Verizon to introduce the panelists. It's all yours, Sarah.
Thank you, Dirk. Well, first of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to thank Dirk and his whole team, Rachel Beck, Nora, Emma, Cecilia, Vinny, everyone at the Chamber that I didn't mention here, who's been such a great partner thus far. We're grateful to have the opportunity to present on this topic today, and we're proud to be partners with the city in this respect. Next slide, please. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation on why connectivity is key to COVID resilience. We're pleased that you could take the time out of your schedule to join us in this ever relevant topic, and we're ever eager to ensure that it's a value-packed as we can make it for you today. First, I'd like to explain how this call is set up on a technical front, as Dirk and Emma briefly mentioned. Emma's graciously agreed to mute all lines in the interim, but rest assured that she'll unmute you in the Q&A section at the end of today's presentation. We encourage you to utilize that chat function that you'll see in the Zoom call, as Emma will pull questions from that chat at the end of the session. Direct that to me, and then I'll accordingly direct that to our panelists. In a moment, I'll be introducing all of the panelists. After introductions, I'll kick things off with an overview of why connectivity is key during this unique time in our history, and review how Verizon supported businesses during this pandemic before turning things over to our featured panelists. Next slide, please. Let's get you all acquainted with the panelists on today's webinar. Going from left to right on your screen, I'm Sarah Muley, Verizon State Government Affairs for Colorado. I focus on Verizon's relationships with our municipal elected leaders throughout this state and help to shape policy that's a win-win-win for the city of Colorado Springs, the business community, and Verizon. I'll be facilitating today's events. Your first panelist is Ryan Trujillo, Director of Support Services of the City of Colorado Springs. Ryan will be providing the city perspective of technology in the Springs for you today. Your second panelist is Scott Haidt, Manager of Business Development and Strategy at Verizon. Piggybacking off of the foundation that Ryan laid, Scott will go into detail for you regarding Verizon's network investment in the Springs and how that makes sense for business really at any time, but especially when connectivity needs are compounded by the recent events. Finally, Andrew Cole will be your last panelist today. Andrew is our Verizon Manager for Outreach and Municipal Engagement on our wireless side of the house, and he'll help round out what connectivity means in the grand scheme of things in terms of future tech opportunities for both the city and businesses alike. Next slide, please. As any good business leader recognizes, connectivity is a key element to being competitive and an efficiently ran business. The businesses best braced to be resilient recognized this fact before COVID, and were thus braced in a better position to adapt and be flexible when the pandemic hit, as networks across the country felt the impact of our new stay-at-home realities. To illustrate those impacts felt by all networks during the pandemic, I'd like to take you through the next two slides. This first slide on changes in demands to voice usage illustrates the spike in voice calls that networks across the country were experiencing. As you can see, compared to averages of the same time period of years past, networks saw a 24% increase in the height of the pandemic's impact around March 23rd. A trend that, while declining to 14% by mid-May, was nevertheless above average throughout the pandemic. Next slide, please. The second slide likewise shows you the same time frame from March to May in terms of data usage across all carriers. Given we are in a world now where the average American has 11 connected devices in their home, let alone when you expand that to a work footprint, it's no surprise that data demands have likewise spiked while everyone was forced to rethink the way they connect with customers. communicate with their vendors, and manage their employees. As you can see, we saw spikes of data usage up about 20%, topping off mid-April, but again, consistently above average over this period. Together, these two slides combined illustrate how crucial connectivity is for everyone, but notably businesses, to have a strong voice and data connections to be able to maneuver during COVID. Next slide, please. While being in communities with strong, solid connectivity, policy, and networks is one thing that businesses can do to position themselves to weather storms like we've been experiencing these last few months. Here are some additional steps that Verizon's taken to support the business community itself. We've extended our Keeping America Connected pledge, which is a promise to not terminate service, nor charge late fees for businesses unable to pay their bills impacted by COVID. We're also part of a coalition of about 40-odd businesses across multiple industries with what's known as the American Express Stand for Small program. That program supports small businesses navigating through COVID impacts. Next, there's also a program that we launched with the Local Initiative Support Coalition that we funded with $7.5 million of donations. This is a pool of funds for COVID relief that go to businesses in amounts of grants of $10,000. Next, we also offered free fleet management, intelligence video solutions, and field management solutions so companies can track and monitor their vehicles, assets, employees, and work. Lastly, we were proud to team up with other companies to form People Plus Work Connect, which is an initiative that pairs up companies who've recently laid off employees with those that are looking to hire. Now that we've explored the spikes in data and voice connectivity and touched on what Verizon has done to support businesses during this time, we'll shift to our first panelist, Ryan Trujillo at the City of Colorado Springs, as he guides you through the foundation of forward-thinking policies that city leaders have already laid to create connectivity-friendly business environment for your companies to thrive. Ryan, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Thank you to the Chamber and the Verizon team for having the City of Colorado Springs participate in this event. I just wanted to provide a 30,000-foot overview of SmartCOS, which hopefully a lot of you have heard about. If you haven't, it's our Smart Communities program that's led by the City of Colorado Springs and Colorado Springs Utilities. We've been on this journey, which I'll talk about for some time, but connectivity is absolutely key, not only for businesses in our community, but also for critical city services, critical utility services, and also for the deployment of IoT, the Internet of Things, IoT devices that we're deploying. If those of you that have smart devices in your home, Sarah mentioned, I believe it's 7 is on average, smart devices in your home. That's everything from a cell phone that's connected to the internet to an irrigation system. Maybe it's a Ring doorbell, garage door openers, refrigerators, really every device, everything in a home can now be connected. And so we're taking that same technology and implementing that in the city's right-of-way to help better improve our services, our service delivery as a municipality. But also to hopefully drive economic development in our region. And of course, connectivity is key. And even during the COVID pandemic, SmartCOS is definitely alive and well. I'm joined here today also with Josh Hanley. He's the Innovation Manager who oversees the Office of Innovation. The Office of Innovation is one of the divisions in the Support Services Department. Also here with Elena Nunez with the Colorado Springs Utilities Economic Development, who's been instrumental in this project from its inception. So really the intention of not only doing some projects in the city, but also developing an ecosystem of government, nonprofit, and private sector partners. So you'll see on this slide a number of government and public partners. We really want this to be a community-wide effort and for all stakeholders in our region to look for ways to adopt advanced technologies for the betterment of their business or for our community. For example, the U.S. Army is doing a pilot autonomous vehicle project on base, and the second phase of that is to integrate that into the city's transit infrastructure. But I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's definitely want to make this a regional approach. Next slide is we have the nonprofit partners. I will mention the Chamber and EDC has been instrumental and involved from the very beginning when we had our ideation summit in helping to develop that strategy. We're also partnering with the National Cybersecurity Center to make sure that whatever's deployed is done in a secure manner, and they're looking at programs that they can replicate to other cities as well. A few others that I'll mention is the Colorado Smart Cities Alliance. This is a nonprofit that has other smart cities across the state. I believe there's about 24 members of that alliance, and it's really sharing best practices and lessons learned around smart city deployments. US Ignite is also a national nonprofit, similar to the Colorado Smart Cities Alliance. It ties in a number of communities across the nation who are pursuing smart city technology. So definitely want to learn from those who have done similar projects. Next slide. We have a host of private sector partners, obviously Verizon being one of those, but also Panasonic was very instrumental in the early strategy development, and a number of other private partners, as you'll see on this slide. Some of those are related to fiber deployments, small cell deployments. Others are contracts that we have in place for IoT deployments, but really want to build this ecosystem, again, around public, nonprofit, and private sector partners. Next slide. So here's where we are and where we've come from. So this initiative started back in 2017 with the strategy development. We started with an ideation summit, which really brought together a number of regional stakeholders to help develop a strategy, or at least start the development of a strategy as it relates to what we want to become as a smart city here in Colorado Springs. There's no universal definition of what a smart city is. We believe it's more of a journey than a destination, and it's something that will continue to evolve and grow as we move forward. There was a proclamation that was issued in 2017 between the Colorado Springs Utilities Board, City Council, and the Mayor's Office that we're going to pursue this program. In 2018, we published our Smart City Strategy. You can find this on our website at coloradosprings.gov/smartcos. And in there, you'll find 11 different concepts that we're building off of as we move forward. On the heels of that, we also developed a smart district master plan for particularly for Southwest downtown with all the redevelopment that's going on there. But this plan is also replicatable in other development areas around Colorado Springs. So excitingly, we're now in the pilot implementation phase, which kicked off in 2019 and into 2020. And this pilot implementation phase is not only to test out new technologies, but it's also to build business case. We want to have scalable deployments of this technology to really see that value and drive that economic development in our region. And also inform policy. There's a lot of policy decisions as it relates to cyber, as it relates to personal identifiable information. So through these pilots and through these projects, we'll help inform those decisions. I'll briefly touch on these pilot projects and happy to answer any questions as we get into the Q&A session. But smart streetlights, these are controllable streetlights that we now have the ability to turn on and off. We know the energy consumption, and there's some other benefits as it relates to utility operation and maintenance for smart streetlights. FirstNet is a emergency management or a public safety communication network that's been implemented in the city. Our smart parking solution, and a lot of these are identified in our initial strategy plan, so it's exciting to see they come to fruition. But on smart parking in particular, you've probably seen some recent press around the ability to pay for parking through a mobile app. So that's being deployed. It's actually a scalable project that's being deployed across the entire parking enterprise, which is very exciting for downtown businesses. And there's a lot of other data being collected through sensor technology. Last year, we also upgraded our app. So if you haven't heard of our app yet, it's GoCOS. Go to the App Store right now. If you don't have it already, it's a great way to interact with the city. You can report anything from a pothole to graffiti to a downed tree to traffic concerns all through that app, and it's very easy to use and accessible. In 2020, we actually were awarded a grant from the Colorado Department of Local Affairs for an EV readiness plan. We just completed the RFP process or in contract negotiations to get a vendor on board to help us develop a strategy. And that ranges from everything from public charging infrastructure to policy related questions on code changes or utility rate changes to help incentivize EV adoption in our region, but also look at our internal fleet to see what we can do on converting some of our non-combustible engine vehicles to EVs. Related to that is our Smart Fleet pilot project. This relates to telematics. We've been in the telematic game for some time, but looking to that market has evolved substantially. So looking to upgrade our telematics and also implement high definition cameras, which can possibly let us know when there's issues in our right of way, as well as optimize the routes of various fleet operations that we have in the city. AMI is a utility-specific project. AMI stands for Automated Metering Infrastructure. It's basically a smart meter for your home. It's a long-term project over the next 4 or 5 years. All of your electric, gas, water, and wastewater meters will be replaced with these smart meters, which is a lot of benefit and a lot of use cases around that, mainly around utility consumption and a lot of data for utility to really track and better plan for the future. Smart security, these we have a number of pilots for. Obviously we have a number of cameras that are already deployed, but using analytics on the back end to help to make monitoring the footage a little bit more easy, and we want to make our community more safe. So smart public safety is definitely an area of focus. And then we get to small cell and 5G. So we're if you can go to the next slide, we're not we haven't deployed 5G per se for Colorado Springs. But we are working heavily to get to that point through small cell deployments. And if you haven't heard of a small cell, the illustration on the bottom, typically for wireless communication, and the Verizon team can fill you in a lot more than I can on the technicalities, but it's moving away from the big macro towers. You might see them on a water tower or an individual standalone pole, try to make it look aesthetic, and some are even disguised as trees. But small cell is really, and the advancement of 4G and development of 5G networks really requires a more dense small cell application. And so you'll see more of these popping up throughout the community. We do have a number of those that have been deployed. And I will say the street light that you see on that illustration is not typically what you'll be seeing of 5G. They will be more aesthetic. And that leads to the point of negotiating master license agreements with telecommunications companies, Verizon being the company that we've been working most closely with in this effort. So the master license agreement helps us prioritize assets. So we definitely want to focus on street lighting. Those are deployed throughout our entire city. We have over 26,000 street lights in Colorado Springs. So before we get into deploying those on traffic signals or a standalone pole, which other communities have done, it helps us prioritize those assets in partnership with our telecommunications companies. It also helps with the aesthetic requirements. So as telecommunication companies are essentially another utility who has access to city right-of-way, it's definitely been a partnership with Verizon and others on developing aesthetic requirements to make sure that if a street light is replaced to accommodate a 5G small cell that doesn't have the bulky boxes that you see on that pole, you might see a few that have been deployed here in the city. But those poles have to match other surrounding poles. If it's in the downtown core, it'd have to kind of match the green light poles that we have. So trying to maintain the aesthetics as best as we can. And it also is just a good agreement that we have in place. The Office of Innovation manages the master license agreements, as well as all of the cable franchise agreements with some of our other providers of cable and internet. So small cell, 4G, making that more robust, and also the deployment of 5G eventually will definitely help drive economic development. There's a lot of benefits of 5G, and with us becoming more of a digital city, COVID definitely has highlighted that, obviously, with telecommuting. I set a timer on myself just because I can get a little wordy. But communication is absolutely key in this, and not only from a wireless standpoint, but we've done a lot in the past in terms of fiber deployments for city assets. Almost all of the single-miles intersections throughout the city are so it's a foundation to open those small cities to have that connectivity. Next slide. So this is related to the smart district. The next slide there. This is really what we want our streets of the future to look like. And Southwest downtown is an area that we're looking to do that. I don't see it on my screen yet, but I'll just talk through it. There we go. It's so smart parking. A lot of the things that I've touched on in terms of the pilot projects that are being deployed, we're utilizing as much as we can in the Southwest downtown core. It's a lot easier to deploy these technologies as you're redeveloping and reinvesting in your community. And there's going to be a lot of that going on, obviously, over the next few decades, which is very exciting. So the Office of Innovation, the team, and a lot of the departments on the utility side are actively looking at these areas of opportunities to deploy as much as we can, build those use cases, build those business cases, and hopefully save money, generate revenue potentially on some of these applications, and move us forward to become a smart community. So with that, next slide, I'll introduce Scott Height, our colleague at Verizon, who we've been working very closely with over, it's probably been 18 months to a year, 2 years that we've been working with Scott, and I happen to share a birthday with him. So Scott, take it away.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks to everyone. We appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Verizon is proud to be part of the Colorado Springs business community, and personally, it's pretty awesome to be based in our Garden of the Gods facility. I'm sure you all are familiar with Verizon wireless network and our retail store presence, as Verizon has been part of the Springs even longer than I've been part of Verizon. So it was really exciting when we made the decision to build our fiber infrastructure here as well. Ryan, I think you were pretty close. It was near the end of 2017 when we met with Ryan and other city leaders to discuss our Colorado Springs network infrastructure investment plans, and a great deal has been accomplished since. Thankfully, the city and partners like Colorado Springs Utilities, they provided us a chance to tell our story and discuss how the second largest city in Colorado and the #1 most desirable city to live in America would benefit from Verizon's investment. Next slide, please. And investments are an important part of our story and a big part of our network build experience. The image on this page represents some of the capital investments and strategic acquisitions Verizon has made in building networks prepared for the future and supporting the innovation they enable. We're not here today to just talk about who Verizon is, but it is important for a city of innovation in aerospace, cybersecurity, home of the global positioning system, national defense contracting, and many other advanced creative professions to understand more about the depth and experience Verizon brings to the table. We have a unique capability to deliver communication in our digital world with assets like MCI and XO Communications for building fiber optic networks, providing business services, and densifying infrastructure for our wireless network in order to deliver the experience you need. Acquisitions like Skyward, drone operations management, and Sensity smart city systems enabled by our ThinkSpace IoT platform, so we can help communities like Colorado Springs increase economic growth and development, drive citizen engagement, and enable sustainability initiatives. And earlier, you heard Sarah speak to what Verizon is doing to keep businesses connected during these tough times. And that's an investment in us all. Next slide. You heard Ryan speak of partnerships, and great communication is key to any partnership. So Verizon, City, and Colorado Springs Utilities resources are working together. We're aligning on initiatives like the 2C project, where we coordinate construction efforts between our organizations in order to minimize the community and business disruption. we're planning through collaboration on forward-thinking strategies like PlanCOS and SmartCOS mentioned earlier. We're working together by incorporating and prioritizing Colorado Springs economic growth projects into our network design. Next slide, please. Communication needs of our communities, governments, and business are rapidly evolving. And we understand your network is a critical component to your business. It supports your customers, your employees, and the suppliers you depend on. So our collaborative efforts mentioned today, they're intended to move us all forward and ensure the Colorado Springs communications networks are ready for today and tomorrow. With fiber services expansion, improved wireless network reliability and experience, and enabling the next generation of technology. And as we're experiencing today, communications technologies and the way we work continues to be more virtualized and mobile each day. With that, I'd like to introduce Andrew Cole.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again to the Chamber for having us and to the city for joining us today. This slide is meant to just talk about some of the trends and the status of the wireless industry. I focus most of my time at Verizon on the wireless side of things, and I have been using this slide before March when most of our lives were upended. And I think we can all just agree that these numbers will shift probably in an obvious direction of more usage. But the top numbers are just meant to show that there's this explosion of growth in wireless, especially on the data side. So that 18x number just shows how much mobile traffic has grown over the past 5 years. The average North American smartphone user is predicted to use 48 gigs of data a month by 2023. The average number of connected devices in a North American household is 13, and that's probably already dated. You know, and those were probably thinking of things like your phone, your tablet. As Ryan mentioned about a smart city, you know, and then you can add on top a smart home. People are starting to wear more devices, your smart watches, and then again, we're going to add all kinds of things in a home that are going to be connected. So those were all things that were happening before COVID hit. It will be, you know, we'll see studies and hard data that will come out showing, you know, what that did. I can imagine it's only going to likely show that the curve accelerated, you know, as far as usage goes. The bottom number is just a reminder to show us how ubiquitous wireless has become in our lives. 90% of US households use wireless. More than half are wireless only for their phone connection. And 3/4 of 911 phone calls originate from wireless devices. So that's just a reminder. Again, you know, with COVID, the joke, if I could, you know, just remember how many times, how many articles I saw about how voice was the new killer app during COVID. Very interesting to see, you know, again, as our lives were all kind of thrown into upheaval, what it's meant. But whether you're using your phone for data tasks, or whether you're using it to talk, or whether you're using other connected devices for data consumption, I think the idea is we can all just see that there's just a tremendous usage. If you want to go ahead and go to the next slide, here's another one that's already dated. You know, there's this move in how our workforce is being distributed. Again, lots of predictions, lots of people writing about, you know, what this is going to look like coming out of COVID. I can only imagine that it's going to increase. You know, the number of folks who work from home part-time or all the time, and what that means, but it's going to continue to mean a need to be connected. And if you go ahead and go to that next slide, you know, it can get really easy to get caught up in you know, the hype around the next generation of technology. There's a lot of confusion about what 5G means, you know, who's deploying it in what way. I think a really good way to just kind of distill everything back down and help understand is that our wireless network is just like a highway. And those of us in Colorado are very used to thinking about our highways and the number of lanes and what it costs to build and manage that. So I like to use this analogy because I think it's very easy for all of us to understand. The idea is just that that, you know, our wireless signals travel over a finite radio frequency spectrum. We're licensed to use particular parts of the spectrum. Again, it is a limited resource. And so, you know, our engineers work every day to make the best use of that resource possible. But the reality is that, you know, as you add more cars to the highway or you add more data to your networks, it gets bogged down. And so, you know, Ryan had mentioned talking about moving from a macro world to small cells. We'll continue to build macro facilities. Those are kind of the tried and true, you know, main parts of the highway. But the small cells, you know, we've been building small cells for a number of years now within the industry in a 4G world. And you can think of small cells as adding maybe a single lane or two, or to carry the analogy all the way through, it's like adding on and off ramps. You're going to get, you know, if a car, you know, only needs to go down that highway for a quarter mile, if it can get on and off quicker, it's going to stay out of the way of all the other vehicles. Is a rough analogy. I'm sure my RF engineer peers would take issue with some of the specifics of that, but it's a good way to think about it. And then as we move into the 5G world, you know, depending on which part of the spectrum you're using, we're going to be able to add really significant lanes to that highway. But I think, you know, I'm going to hand it back over to Sarah here in just a minute to kind of summarize and wrap up. But I think when we set out to talk about this today, you know, we wanted to talk to you all as members of the business community and leaders in it, and we wanted you to get an update on the status. But mostly, what we wanted to communicate was the idea that your community has already done a lot of the hard work to be prepared, to be resilient and recover in the best way possible, you know, from COVID and all the fallout that's going to come from it. You know, Ryan showed that roadmap of the things that the city's done on the smart community side. I can assure you it's a long process to come up with, for example, that master license agreement, to come up with design standards. You know, we've been laying fiber. We have built some small cells, and we're working very closely with the city on building more and expanding the network. So, you know, there'll be, you know, more news to come, and we'll talk more specifics, you know, as those announcements come within Colorado Springs. But we want you to know, just like, you know, I guess there's multiple analogies to think about. But you know, sometimes, you know, you drive by a house in the construction site, and, you know, you see the wood frame go up, and then there's like a whole bunch of work that goes on. You know, you may drive by it every day before one day, you know, someone moves in and they're living there. And I guess we just wanted you all to walk away with the idea that there's a lot of work going on in the background, but it's work that started, you know, started months and years ago. And it's going to put Colorado Springs as a community in a really great position to have the best of the benefits of being connected, which, as we've learned over the last few months, painfully, is more important now than ever. So, you know, thanks again to the city for all the work that you all have done with us, and And that's not just specific to Verizon. You know, good policy is good policy for everyone, which again is going to benefit the entire community. But we really appreciate the collaborative effort that's gone into creating good policy that allows us to deploy our networks in ways that are good for the community, to keep you all connected and take care for things like aesthetics and the specifics of your community. So we really appreciate that. And with that, I'm just going to hand it back over to Sarah for a summary.
Thanks. Next slide. Thanks. Thanks, Andrew. To recap, so you obviously just heard Ryan lay the foundation there with what the city's already done to put the city in a great position to welcome those types of investments. Scott detailed what those investments are in the Springs specifically and how that network positions the Springs to thrive in the future. And you heard Andrew lastly just detail what that could mean in the whole spectrum of what's to come and what that could mean for your bottom line specifically in the future. So with that, that concludes our content today from our panelists. We're now going to shift gears to the Q&A portion of the call. So with that, I'll turn things over to Emma to field the first call, or pardon me, question from the chat room.
Thank you everyone for your presentation. I've been looking through these questions and I have a few. Can you tell me first, is my screen sharing right now or not? Are we good?
No.
It's not sharing?
Q&A is yes.
It is? Okay, then I'm gonna stop sharing because I want everyone to see your faces large. Okay, perfect. So first I wanted to mention that the raffle winner was Bernie McDonald. So Bernie, if you can private message me your address, that would be great. You've won 2 gift cards to Concept Restaurants. The first question I have is for Ryan. What is the next step in the SmartCOS program? Can you remind us of the timeline for what will be done next?
Yeah, so the timeline of what's next, Josh and his team are working on kind of a roadmap of the next steps. In this pilot implementation phase, you know, it's going to definitely go through the end of 2020 into 2021. And we don't want to just chase technology or chase different solutions. What we want to do is build those business case, build those use cases to really fit the need of the technology. So a lot of that was developed through the initial strategy. And so really it's just building upon the pilot implementation phase, doing additional pilots, given the current economic situation and the significant reduction of sales tax. Funding is always a challenge, even prior to COVID, but even more so now. So we're also looking for additional grant funding opportunities. And, you know, this is, again, a journey, not a destination. So I imagine we'll be in the pilot implementation phase for months, if not multiple years. But really our intention is to scale those projects where it makes sense, and we can have that business case developed across the city. So more to come on that.
Thank you, Ryan. The next question is the city using Verizon's Fleetmatics platform for their smart fleet project?
Currently we are not. We're going through a pilot, and really the telematics is a portion of that, but really the intention of this smart fleet pilot is for route optimization and HD camera solutions in vehicles to identify obstacles in the right of way. So you know, most of our pilots, if we could build a business case, we would go out to some type of an RFP for some type of solution depending on the project. So there's still an opportunity down the road.
Okay, and the next question, and Sarah, you might have to give this question to somebody. How is Verizon, the city, and Colorado Springs Utilities vetting consultants, and how are they verifying experience in an industry that is brand new, such as aerial, I think it was aerial drones?
I would toss the baton to Scott on that one.
So I think as it relates to drones specifically, we're not really involved yet with what we would use drones for in the city, but we have the capabilities through Skyward to do that. So vetting consultants, it would be a Verizon company. So Skyward would be a Verizon entity. If we were to trial that, that would be our organization to trial. As far as the consultant side of that, that would really depend upon what was in play outside of Skyward, if I understand the correction or understand the question correctly. So as far as vetting consultants, if there were to be consultants involved in that, if we were to engage consultants, we would certainly have to vet them, because we'd be talking about utilizing Verizon's asset to deploy or to trial in that environment. I hope I understood the question correctly.
And I'll also add, from the city's perspective, how we vet consultants is traditionally through a procurement process, and that hasn't changed. So when we developed our initial strategy, there was a very robust RFP process to get a consultant on board, very competitive with global organizations. I believe there was about 16 respondents to that initial RFP. Another example is the EV readiness plan. We just issued an RFP process to get a consultant on board to help us develop an EV readiness plan. So, it's a good point that this is a relatively new market, depending on the solution, depending on what the use case is, and the IoT devices that are associated with it. Some are pretty robust and pretty mature markets, but if it's a newer market, we definitely want to vet those through some type of formal process to make sure that whoever we hire and we spend taxpayer dollars, that they're qualified to help us with that specific project or initiative that we're working on.
Thank you, guys. The next one, Verizon has a pretty solid network. Are there redundancy strategies in the event that there are network issues?
Scott and Andrew, I'll leave it to you guys to tag team this one.
Yeah, Scott, I'll start on the wireless side. That we could do a whole lunch and learn on that topic, but I'll just touch briefly on and just say that. And by the way, I didn't plant that, but this is really an area where Verizon. It's a point of emphasis. It has been from the inception of our organization as a company. So there's a lot of ways to think about redundancy. Most of our macro facilities have, for example, generator backups. They all have battery backups. We have an entire response team that can be out in the field on very short notice, setting up temporary facilities, either if our own equipment goes down or to augment, things like a good Colorado, it's hurricane season down south, but a great example here in Colorado is during fire season, we'll show up to deploy additional assets, either, if a facility is damaged by a forest fire, or if the firefighters out in the field need additional. So we have redundancy really built into the very heart of the wireless network, and then that wireless network is fed by wires. We joke around, there's a lot of wires in the wireless industry. So I'll hand it off to Scott to talk about some of the redundancy on the fiber side. But I think summary to say, we understand how important the connections that we facilitate on a day-to-day basis are. We take that very seriously, and it's foremost on our mind as we build and maintain the network.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. I think Andrew covered a great deal of it. So our network is really built for redundancy and for emergency preparedness, whether it be our wireless infrastructure, our fiber infrastructure. We have dual redundant network operations centers in different parts of the country that we can really review, or if one goes down, it can roll over to the other. So we have redundancy built into all sides of the network. And on the fiber side, it's a little more challenging, obviously, to get to that fiber that's in the ground. However, we do have hardware, and the way that's above ground to access, and the way that we would be able to use that is to reroute our fiber and the fiber paths based upon the way that we do design and build the fiber network itself. So I think we do have that covered in multiple areas, but I would agree with Andrew, that is an entire dialogue in and of itself, because it's a pretty comprehensive design and structure on both sides of whether it be wireless or fiber.
All right, next question. Will we see autonomous vehicles in Colorado Springs?
I think the short
Ryan,
answer is
I think
yes.
that's you.
Short answer is yes. I think the biggest question is when. The biggest momentum is through that pilot project at Fort Carson that I briefly touched on. They were awarded a $4 million grant by the Department of Defense to deploy autonomous vehicles on base. So I guess technically they're part of Colorado Springs, so we will have those even by the end of this year, have some AVs deployed. But Josh and his team are working very closely with a number of departments internally to look at use cases for other areas of town. I know during the ideation summit very early on, and we've actually built upon that scope of work and have a pretty defined scope, is to possibly even have autonomous vehicles at Garden of the Gods. There's no funding, there's no grant opportunities currently, but we're always looking for areas where any of these technologies that we've identified very early on and continue to evolve. I mean, small cell 5G, if you look at our initial strategy, was not identified as a key component, but we spend a significant amount of time and effort working to get that connectivity to our community. So I do think going back to the Fort Carson example, $4 million is quite a bit of funding. And that's through the partnership with US Ignite and the Department of Defense. And so the second phase of that is to integrate autonomous vehicles outside of the base. And an obvious solution would get that to have an autonomous vehicle take soldiers and folks living on base to a public transit facility that's off base. But there's, we're in the kind of the brainstorming session now. Do you have something going from Fort Carson all the way to downtown? We've always batted around the idea that we're going to have these new tourist attractions and new amenities in our community with the museum, the Switchback Stadium, the Colorado College Stadium. We already have the U.S. Olympic Museum. So could we have autonomous vehicles shuttling people to and from these areas of interest in our community? So again, short answer is yes, and I gave more of a long answer of what we're looking at, but actively looking for grant opportunities. The challenging part is right now it costs quite a bit of money for an autonomous vehicle. So without grant funding, it's been a little bit challenging, but we're developing those use cases and business cases. So when opportunities do arise, we're ready to react.
All right, Sarah, this question's for you. In your work, what are your most pressing issues on the legislative front?
That's a good question. So we have two colleagues that are not highlighted today, but we're always concerned about making sure that there's sound protection for the small cell policies that already exist on the books, insofar that it affects kind of the topic of today. So, just protecting the protections that are already in place and making sure that we're collaborating and working with cities on how to reasonably implement those on a one-on-one basis. It's not a one-size-fits-all. Colorado Springs is not Denver and is not Fort Collins, et cetera. So, I think probably our point of emphasis is taking that small cell deployment act that's already on the books at the state level, and making sure that there's cohesion with what the municipality is implementing with, things that Ryan touched on with design guidelines, aesthetics, general work in the right of way, and just how carriers continue to partner with cities in effective ways that foster deployment so that we can bring all those solutions we talked about earlier in the program.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more question, and you guys might not be happy with me with this question. how do you address the naysayers of 5G? I'm sure you have some things that you can say that are, Q&As to that.
Could you repeat it? I'm sorry.
How do you address naysayers of 5G?
Got it. I'll just briefly say, I think a lot of the naysayers express concerns around health and safety. Some of that is, I think maybe some of that's misunderstanding. There's a lot we could say on health and safety. The message on health and safety is no matter which part of the RF spectrum you're using, that there's a lot of scientific consensus that the wireless networks, the way we operate them, there are limits set by the FCC for the amount of emissions that can be sent out as far as people coming into contact with it, and so long as carriers fall within those limits, and we're well within those limits, that there's no known risk to the general population. 5G at the end of the day is just an industry standard, a specification. Over time, all the equipment will eventually be upgraded so that all parts of the spectrum, over an extended period of time, all parts of the spectrum will use what's called 5G, which is again just kind of upgrading and meeting those specifications. The millimeter wave part of 5G again is what I think a lot of people have expressed concerns about, and I think some of those are because they feel like it's new and different. It may be newer for commercial wireless. It's not newer in the sense of overall use of that spectrum to deliver wireless services. There is a lot of, again, science around just wireless in general, and there's ongoing science around health and safety, and we'll see that continue. Unfortunately, the kind of fringe parts of it, recently you've seen people associate 5G with COVID and things like that, which is really unfortunate because there are real challenges out there. Those aren't scientifically proven. So, I think that's probably one of the big part of the naysayers as far as naysayers go. The other might, if we're gonna, address it head on, are the aesthetics around small cells, and the industry maybe didn't put its best foot forward when we collectively started with small cells. But I can assure you it's been, a point of emphasis. And, like Ryan said, we've worked very hard with Colorado Springs to come to agreements on, what makes sense aesthetically within the given communities where we operate, but we can still provide the newest and best wireless services to the community.
All right, well, we had a couple more questions, but I know you guys are going to share your contact information at the end, so anyone who had questions can reach out to you with those. So Sarah, is there anything you wanted to say before I shared that last screen?
No, go ahead and share. So I'll wrap things up for the sake of time, guys, but we just wanted to conclude, if you're wondering kind of what steps you can take if you're passionate about this topic as a business leader in the Colorado Springs community, it's right there on the screen. Just stay informed, stay engaged, stay in touch with us. So we're going to be passing out some educational handouts after the presentation today. So hopefully we can resolve any of those questions too that lingered from the chat room. Stay engaged, have a conversation at your dinner table, have a conversation at your lunch counter with your vendors and your employees on the topic. And if you're passionate about it, reach out and let the local leaders know that you're supportive of it, what it can mean for your business. And also stay in touch with us. We're going to have a contact us page at the end of the presentation here, as Emma mentioned. So all of our names and emails are on there, as well as what kind of subject matter we cover. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. No questions too big or too small. So with that said, next slide, Emma, please. That concludes our Chamber Connect series today. Thanks again to the Chamber for including us. Thanks for Ryan and the city for joining us. Stay well as we move forward together. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I'll leave this slide up just for a minute so everybody can take down the information. But thanks to all of our presenters today. This was really wonderful. Have a good rest of your day.